When the cold slid down from the hills like a quiet judgment and settled into the tents, John lay awake and listened to the camp breathe. Somewhere a horse stamped and blew, steam lifting from its nostrils like a soul. Men turned on the frozen ground, their blankets cracking faintly as hoarfrost had stiffened the wool. Beyond the outer fires, wolves sang thin, far notes, and the answering growls of wildling dogs rolled back over the dark. The road to Winterfell was a white ribbon under a sky pricked with brittle stars. He had dreamed of snow and stone and warm halls. He had dreamed of a girl running through a godswood with copper leaves. He had dreamed of a father whose face he could never quite see when he reached for him. When he woke, the cold felt like a judgment. He rose. Ghost lifted his great white head from where he lay against the tent wall and blinked those pale red eyes that saw what men did not. The dire wolf stretched, a ripple of silent muscle, and slid alongside John with that uncanny grace that always made John think of snow moving over rock. He fastened his cloak and did not light a lantern. The night was clear and hard enough to see by, and he had spent years in a world where watchmen learned to let darkness be their ally. Outside, Frost wrote delicate, careless script on the guy ropes. It was an hour before dawn by the sickly yellow shape of the moon, an hour when the camp was too tired to be properly on guard and too disciplined to truly sleep. Tormund Giantsbane snored like a saw. The Norvashi Cell's word with the twisted ear hummed in his dreams. Somewhere close by, a child coughed the cough of a winter not yet done with her. John moved quiet as thought through the sleeping army and out beyond the firebreak where the frost had crusted the grass. The land opened and whispered. He felt, as he always did, the call of the further north tugging like a tide in his veins. Beyond these soft hills, the world went on into a white that was not clean and a cold that was not only cold. And in Winterfell, in their old home of stone and memory, his brother sat captive to a boy who wore men like a garment. He hadn't meant to go to the little rise alone. He had meant to pace the tents and climb back into his bed to stare at the dark until dawn. But his feet carried him to that low hummock with its blackened stump where lightning had turned a birch into a sculpture of charcoal. Ghost ranged ahead and came back, breath frosting, ears pricked. If men hunted here, Ghost would have told him. A pause, and the snow's hush cracked under boots. John turned. Sansa came like a shadow, clothed in a dark cloak embroidered with black thread, so the wolves on it were a hint rather than a shout. Her hair was braided so severely it made her seem older than she should have been. The starlight remembered the copper anyway, picking out burnished sparks. She did not speak. She climbed the rise and stood at his side and looked toward Winterfell's low shape. Even at this distance, the burned tower was a notch against the sky. Ghost walked to her and leaned the weight of his flank against her legs. She steadied herself with a hand in the thick fur, and the lines around her mouth, lines that had no place on that face, softened. "Sleep?" John asked. Her laugh was almost a cough. "If I closed my eyes, I saw him. Ramsay. Rickon." The name was a break in ice, and the water that showed beneath was dark and moving fast. She took a breath. And after him, other things, other faces. "I do not want to sleep if sleep is only a house for ghosts." "Ghosts are better in houses than wandering," John said. "You can close doors, and he kicks them down." She stood very straight. "We parley again today. We offer single combat again today," John said. He had said the words 10 times, and they did not change the hard fact. A man like Ramsay Bolton did not play games whose outcome could not be arranged in his favor. "He will refuse again." "You sound sure." "He is sure of numbers. He is sure of his walls. He is sure of the fear he has bought with other men's lives. He is a coward that wears bravery like fine linen." John kept his voice level and quiet, because the night could feel a heartbeat. "He will refuse." Sansa's silence felt like a held knife. In the pause, a wind went down the hill, cool as a hand. She said very evenly, "Then stop giving him choices." John looked at her. She was not the girl who had sat on a branch and told him how fine King's Landing would be, all the songs and silks and handsome smile of a prince in a mask. She was not the woman who had run barefoot in the snow across a bridge with men behind her who were less than dogs. She had something in her now that was Winter's own. He weighed his words as he weighed a weapon. We've sent ravens to houses that hate the Boltons more than they love us. We sent to men whose fathers would have bled for father for shame of existing otherwise. We've scraped up every sword that could be convinced to follow a bastard's banner when all the banners in the world have been torn. He has more men. He is in our home. He has Rickon. What choice is there but to offer him something he wants more than to keep us out? She angled her head just a fraction, a night owl's motion. What would you give him, John? Me. The word didn't taste of sacrifice. It tasted of a truth that had been waiting in him since he had woken with knives in his belly and a witch's hands on his face. He wants to break what people look at. If he has me, he has that. He thinks I am what the North is looking at now. Sansa didn't move. In the star cold, her face looked carved. Then the knife in her voice came out. No. If he takes me, he lets Rickon go. No, it was the same word twice and not the same word at all. The first had been a refusal. The second had been a denial of the world itself. She stepped closer, so close he could see the small pale scar near the brow hairline where once AR. Ye had struck her with a wooden sword, and they had both laughed, and father had scolded them gently, as if laughter were a thing you had to remind yourself to keep. He won't keep his word. He'll keep you, and he'll keep Rickon, and he'll tell us to come and take either if we can. He'll flay you both and wear your skins to breakfast. Not if he swears it before the old gods, Jon said. He swore enough oaths before every god that would watch when he married me. Sansa's voice had iron in it. He broke them on the bedding. He broke them every hour. Oaths are words, and he is a man who only believes in things he can hold. He believes in fear. He believes in others believing he keeps his word. Sometimes, if it suits him. There are men with him who still believe they're Northern. He needs them. He cannot afford to break the clearest oath in front of them, sworn at a heart tree. He can afford anything, he thinks. Jon exhaled. Ghost pushed his head under Sansa's hand as if he meant to lift her back onto the earth. I am the one who has bled under those trees before and risen. I tell you, some men who follow him would break if they saw him forswear himself where the sap froze. The Umbers keep their word. The Karstarks do when it suits them. But the Umbers... He thought of the great Jon laughing and breaking a bread trencher in his hands like a boy snapping a twig. They remember what their fathers were. Small Jon betrayed the boy he shared a hall with, Sansa said. Don't ask me to believe he remembers anything but the sound of his own name. Belief is for song, Jon said. Calculations are for war. He looked back at the smudge of Winterfell against the stars. The walls were old. The memory in the stones pressed against his chest even from here. I will send it in a letter with terms that make him certain he wins because he keeps me. He can display me on his walls if he likes. He can make me kneel before his dogs. He will like that more than cutting a boy's throat in his courtyard. He will believe you are broken without me. He will believe the wildlings will go home like they always did, to wait for the snows. He will believe you cannot hold an army that came for me. You think this through as if there's an answer at the end. There isn't. Her eyes were dark and very wide, and for a breath he saw the girl again, the one who had believed in songs and was quick to see how the hem of a dress fell. But the next breath, there she was again, the woman who had learned all the wrong songs. You can't give him what he wants. If I don't try, he will take it. If I do, we might get our brother back. He isn't the only brother, Sansa said very quietly. The space in her voice where names should have been was like a graveyard under snow. I won't lose another. We lost them already, Jon said. His throat tightened. He pushed through it like a man riding into wind. In ways, we lose different pieces in different wars. If I can give back one piece to you to the north, then the rest of me has use. I am not good at halls, Sansa. I am not good at looking like the man men want to bow to. I am good at cold ground and hard choices. Let me make this one. No, she said once more, for all the times she would need to say it before either of them broke. I forbid it. He smiled then, weary. On what right, my lady? On the right of a sister who does not want to watch her last brother die, while she stands in the snow pretending to be clever. Her hand had not left ghost. The dire wolf butted her lightly, as if he had decided she belonged. Write your letter, then. Write it with all the words you put on your sword when you draw breath. But do not think I won't act against it. The only terms we have that he will accept are the ones we were already ready to make. What terms were those? John asked. Single combat, she said, and let the brittle smile show. And he refuses. So we don't ask him for anything. We take. The way he has taken. We plan and we take. We don't trust him with a brother we can wrest from him with our own hands. And if we can't? John asked. If the price of trying is Rickon? She did not answer. The wind made small, high noises across the rise. From somewhere in the camp came a murmur, men waking to piss, to look up at the stars as if they might fall. John knew he would write the letter anyway. He would write it because the thought of sitting a horse on a field and watching a small boy run and hearing the hiss of an arrow and knowing he would be the one who had held still. He could not bear that possibility without having first broken himself against every other. There was a particular cold that came with that. Not winter's honest, knife-edged cold. This was the cold of a door closing. He left Sansa on the rise, for she had turned her face to the castle as if she could lean herself nearer by will alone. In his tent, Davos sat like a carved stump, eyes hollowed by a fire that had burned long and dim. John nodded to him and reached for quill and ink. He wrote by the cheapest candle, winding careful honorifics on parchment that had been a list of stores a week ago. Snow, son of Eddard Stark though bastard born. Stark of Winterfell in blood though the world had thought him other. Acting on behalf of the houses gathered. He wrote all that. Then he wrote, I will give myself to be your hostage until the end of this matter, if you will release my brother, Rickon Stark, to our care under the eyes of our gods at the Winterfell Heart Tree. He wrote, you will not harm him. You will swear before those same gods, and the lords of the north that yet remain to you will witness. Each of us will bring 3 companions and no more. You will keep your archers on the walls. I will kneel and I will be bound, and I will be conveyed into your walls then, if only the boy is allowed to leave them. He sanded it and sealed it with a blob of wax that had no sigil, only his thumbprint impressed ugly eye. To the soft. Davos said nothing until John had finished, rolled the letter, and tied it. You ask a wolf to keep his teeth out of the boy while you give him your throat? The old smuggler said mildly, as if this were a matter of hardtack and not a matter of blood. I ask the men watching the wolf, John said. And if they are wolves too? It wasn't contempt. It was a simple weighing of what men were. I do not have a better weapon, John said, and regretted the bitterness that crept out of him when he didn't pull it tight on the leash. Do you? Davos rubbed at the missing finger that always itched when cards were afoot. The better weapons I have are time, patience, and a little luck. Weather, stomachs. Men on the other side who think of their own hearths and whether they'll still have them when this is over. If you give him yourself, you spend those coins all at once. He has Rickon, John said. Every hour he has him, he spends a coin of his own on us. We spend faster than he does if we wait. Davos blew out through his mustache, a low sound. Then I will give you what bad counsel is mine to give. If you go under the eyes of as many men as we can drag. If there is a vow, let every eye that can see it. If this bastard breaks it, make it a breaking all the North knows. There is power in shame we do not make of ourselves. He sat back. I'll send men to wake the ravener. They will have no raven inside those walls, only hounds, John said, and a corner of his mouth went cruel for an instant. A thing he did not let live. But we will try. The messenger they sent was a boy no older than the squire that had brought John water in Harrenhal once, and that boy had died. This one had light serviceable legs and a face like a fox's. Quick eyes, narrow, always thinking if it could cut through the hedge rather than take the path around. His name was Burley, which had set the wildlings laughing so hard the first time he had told it that he had nearly cried. He had turned up in their camp trailing a cart of turnips like a victory, which made him valuable beyond price. John put the letter into his hand and wrapped the fingers around it. "They will try to break your legs for mischief if they can," John told him. "If they catch you and do not kill you outright, say you are a cell boy from the camps who saw a chance to curry favor. Do not say we sent you. Do not say my name. If you reach the gate and they bid you speak, you say, 'Letter for the Lord of Winterfell. No embellishment.' If a guard takes it and does not hand it up, you jab him with your mouth until he slaps you. Make yourself a problem and the letter less of one. Do you understand?" Burley swallowed and nodded. "I am, Lord." He fumbled a bow. The letter looked too large in his thin hand and too weighty as well. "If I run, do I go around the lake or through the birch?" "Through the birch if there's moon," John said. "Around when it's clouded. If a wolf howls, go still and go softer. If a hound barks, go faster." Burley looked as if he wanted to ask if there would be a reward. He pressed his mouth shut and ran. Ghost loped a few steps after him and then returned at John's whistle, turned back by a voice rather than a leash. The letter went like a breath. Dawn came in bruised, with small pinks at the edges as if the sky had been slapped awake. Men roused, pissing steam, stamping, stretching their ache. Davos directed breakfast without seeming to direct anything. Tormund insulted an officer's mother with such cheerful obscenity that the man laughed instead of being insulted. And when he laughed, he ate more. John walked the picket line speaking to horses. He had always found they answered more honestly than men. Ghost ran a fence with a furred thunder that shook frost loose from rope like sugar. The raven returned at noon, if it could be called that. There was no sun, only a paler shape behind thin cloud, but men called such pale days noon because they needed names. It ejected shit on Davos's shoulder and squatted glaring until the old smuggler bribed it with a cut of fatback. The note was tied with a ribbon the color of dried blood. When John broke it, when the ribbon cracked with a sound like a branch underfoot, Ramsay's hand was in the loops and contrary swirls, a man's writing that wanted to be a woman's. "Bring yourself. The boy goes if you do. Come at dusk. The gods would. 3 men only. You do not move until I say move. If you move, arrows. If you bring more than 3, arrows. If you cry out for your savages, arrows. If I tire of your face, arrows. If I smell your wolf, arrows. If my men are cold, arrows. If the gods are bored, arrows. If I am bored, other things. I will swear what suits me in front of what suits you. Bring a rope if being bound soothes your conscience." Davos snorted. Honest in its way. "He answered," John said. His voice did not break, but his breath did. Sansa read over his shoulder. He held the parchment for her to see, though it made him want to fold his hand around it like a shield. A muscle in her perfect jaw jumped. She said nothing. 3 men, John said. "I will take Davos and Tormund." "And me," Sansa said. No, it was sudden, sharp. He hadn't meant to let the word be what it was when it sprang out. "You said yes to 3. I am of the blood he will plague, and of the blood he has already plagued. He would get more pleasure from seeing me than from a dozen wildlings. If you mean to use what pleases him to bait him into honor, use me." "You are not a tool," John said. "Nor are you," she returned. "You are my brother. That makes you something to be used when the world is dire, yes. And I am your sister. That makes me aching in the same way." "She does not go," Davos said. He didn't raise his voice. He merely put the weight of age in it, and that rolled like a wheel. His letter makes the sort of mockery that ends with blood. He won't keep all those ifs, because mockery breaks if it is asked. To be solemn, but he'll keep enough of them. You're not a blade to be cashed. You're a prize he'd keep. Then what have we traded? 1 boy for 1 woman. "I'm not a woman to him," Sansa said. So quietly the men nearest them went still because they felt a knife on the air. "I'm a wound he believes he still owns. If I show him I am not bleeding, if I neither flinch nor curse, it will be a thing he cannot stand." "That is a thing for after we win," John said. "I will not walk you back into his hall." She looked down and away, and in that moment she looked very like Mother, the tilt of head, the way the lips pressed. "You will not keep me safe by making me a piece on your board," she said softly. "Do you hear yourself? I tell you no, and you tell me no. Between those two no's a brother bleeds. I will go with you until the edge of the gods wood. I will stand where he can see me and know that the game has changed. After that, I'll go no further if you say so. Her mouth twitched. The moon will be watching. You asked that once when I was foolish if the moon watched. It always does. Let her watch this. Tormund had been listening with his big hands on his hips, and now he grunted. 3 men, he says. So we bring 2 men and 1 woman and call it 3 men if he asks. He'd never count right even with his boots off. He clapped Jon on the back. If you walk into a bear cave, you bring the biggest bastard with the thickest beard, and that is me. And the red woman? Bring her if you like wickedness watching wickedness. No, Jon said again, but less quick thinking. No red woman. If this is politics, not sorcery, I do not want him thinking we have answers that will make his men more afraid than they already are. Fear makes archers eager. And we don't want archers eager, Davos said. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. We go at dusk, he says. Good. If anything goes wrong, dusk goes to dark fast, and dark is better for leaving. Sansa took a breath as if to speak, then stopped. The wind had turned, and from the forest's very edge a scent came that made Ghost's hackles lift. Meat old and new. The hounds would be fed well for tonight's games. Then, Jon understood the desire to be sick and put it aside with the other desires he did not have time to indulge. He gave orders. Men moved like thrown shadows. They went as if the snow could be persuaded not to notice. Jon wore no sword. He had given Longclaw into Davos's hands and felt the absence like a scar you forget until it aches in the damp. He had strapped nothing but a knife down into his boot, and then he had taken even that out and left it on his cot because he would not give Ramsay a reason to laugh and because an oath was an oath meant to be kept by the oath-taker first. Sansa wore the dark dress, the one that clung like shadow up top and fell away to softness below so she could move. A stark gray cloak that didn't gleam. Tormund had found a leather that didn't creak, and it sat uneasily on him as if it knew it had no business on such a chest. Davos had put a close cap on his head and looked less like a smuggler and more like a fisherman on a day when the sea promised to betray him kindly. They crossed the white to the godswood. The whisper of the weirwood leaves was a dry murmuring, and the face carved in the heart tree watched with eyes red from sap and centuries. Snow had drifted up against the great trunk and made it look as if the tree shook out a white blanket for a babe who did not sleep. Under the boughs the snow was thin. The ground showed dark. Ramsay was there already, dressed in a cloak so black it drank the dusk, with a fur collar like a wolf's throat. He had Small Jon Umber to his right and Harold Karstark to his left. Jon felt a tug in his chest at sight of the Umber, because the great Jon had roared beside Robb and made torches gutter with his laughter. And here his son stood easy as you please in an oathbreaker's shadow. Ramsay nodded as if greeting guests for a name day. Snow. He put a light lilt on it, a woman's mockery again. Sansa, you look less pretty when you're serious. All that frowning. It will give you lines, and then who will want to hurt you? His eyes went to Ghost and he smiled, sharp. I smell your wolf. You smell your kennel, Sansa said. Her cool made the air colder. Ramsay's smile stayed. It had points like a crown cut of glass. I was told 3 men, he said. There's a flower here. Flowers grow in winter if they have a mind, Davos said. And flower or no, we count. You're a man, and yet other men call you bastard. Do your sums elsewise. Small Jon let an ugly huff of a laugh out. Ramsay did not look at him. He looked at Jon and let the smile soften as if they had agreed secretly once and now were merely obliged to play parts in front of others. There's rope. Good. I like a man of his word. His gaze slid. Do you know the best part of a rope, Snow? It's that you can use it to hold or to hang, and only your hand knows which. The oath, Jon said. He kept it simple. Before that tree, with your men watching, with mine. You swear to let Rickon go unharmed as soon as I kneel and you bind me. You swear by the old gods. You break it and the North will know what you are. He looked to the Umber. The men who stand with you will know what they are. Small Jon shifted weight to one leg. He looked at the weirwood face, then at Ramsay. There was a hardness in his jaw that had nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with stubborn pride. "We swore such things before," he said, more to the air than any man. "Men that break at a heart tree break something else in themselves. That spreads." Harold Karstark's mouth was a thin line. He had the look of a man who had long ago decided what his face would say and then never let it say anything else. Ramsay spread his hands. "If this helps you sleep," he said, "I will swear by your tree. Come. Let us kiss the bark together." They walked closer. The heart tree breathed its resin sweet and bitter. Ramsay faced it and put a hand to it, almost tender. He spoke in a voice made solemn, because he understood the sound of things even if not their meaning. "I, Ramsay of House Bolton," he said, and the men nearby shifted. His voice carried too well. "Swear by the old gods of the forest and by the blood in my veins, on all that gives this wood its life, that if the bastard Jon Snow sets his knees to the ground and lets my good men bind him, I will release to him unharmed the boy Rickon Stark. I will let the boy pass from my walls and go where he is taken. I will see that no arrow flies to him or any better. I so swear. If I break it, then may this tree take me." He smiled and tapped the bark with his fingers as if to say, "Try." Then he turned all pleasant host again. "Now, knees." There was a moment. In it Jon took one step to the left and Sansa one step to the right, and the space they made between their bodies was exactly the shape and size of a small boy. He thought that some god was watching from a place where wind was only a memory. He knelt. The snow wet his trousers through and collapsed under his knees with a sound like a sigh. He put his hands out. Davos stepped forward, because men of his sort measured gestures like coin and spent them with care. He did not speak, for there were no more words that would do good. He took the rope and bound Jon's wrists snug, firm, respectful. It was the job of an old sailor, tying a ship to a dock that would not hold if the sea wanted it. Tormund's face had gone very still, which was rare for him. Sansa's breath came quiet and even, braiding itself with ghosts, which went faster. Ramsay leaned and checked the knots with fingers that had touched uglier things with more relish. He murmured, "This is so becoming on you, Snow. The on your knees look. My father would have approved. He liked a man orderly. His breath had the faint sweet of wine. Now, you, Umber, fetch me the boy." Small Jon made a short noise as if someone had struck him with a backhand. He turned, jaw set, and walked back into the shadow of the Godswood where the path ran away toward the inner ward. Harold Karstark sent a pair of men as escort, but they did not go far. There was nothing to protect there. The protection lay where men could see it and see what was done. Jon waited. Wind moved. The heart tree watched past them all. In the waiting, time turned into a thing with a body, and it however led small and got itself twisted in the rope around Jon's wrists. He thought of a boy with eyes as wide as a startled fawn, laughing as he ran with a stick that was suddenly a sword, all those years ago in the courtyard. He thought of Robb's hand heavy and kind on his shoulder, of Bran's straight back when they had looked down on Winterfell from the top of the broken tower. He thought of Arya with her mouth full of bread and a knife she didn't need tucked into her belt anyway, and Sansa's voice singing. The world was a wound that scabbed and broke and scabbed again, and if you were lucky the scars mapped you back home. The crunch of boots came. Small Jon walked with a certain purposeful slowness that said he'd fight anyone who thought to hurry him. Behind him, two men half-dragged, half-led a boy who had once been a pup that bounced off walls. Rickon had grown since Jon had last seen him. He looked like Bran had at that age, startled out of boyhood too early, with angles showing where they oughtn't. His hair was tangled. One cheek had a bruise like a spilled plum. There was a steadiness in him, though a stark stubbornness in the mouth. He did not cry, and that nearly undid Jon. He had never been able to bear it when Rickon cried. When the boy saw Jon, some light that had been banked fluttered up. He did not smile. He did not move. That too was stark. Ramsay's eyes had gone very bright, and so had Sansa's, but in entirely different ways. Ramsay flicked two fingers, and Small Jon brought the boy forward to where the ground beneath the weirwood went black with old wet. He did not shove him. He set him down the way a man sets a heavy pot in a hearth. He looked at John then, straight on, and something in his jaw moved again. "Say it." Small John grunted to Ramsay. "Say it for the men watching." Ramsay sighed theatrically. "This is all so earnest," he said. Then, with that paper-thin gravity again, "I released the boy to Jon Snow upon Snow's binding." "Bind him I did," Davos said. "Release him you do." Ramsay gestured, bored. A knife flashed. Rope fell from Rickon's wrists. For a moment the boy stood as if the rope still held him, the ghost of it await. Then he took a step forward and stopped as if he did not trust that step. His eyes went to Jon's bound hands and then up to Jon's face. And there, Jon saw something like water in drought breaking its own bank. "Rickon," Jon said, and his voice wanted to break, but he did not let it break. He had knelt and tied himself together for this, and he would not unbind. "Come to me." He pitched it level, a father's voice he did not have and had always known anyway. Ramsay hummed a little tune, an ugly little nursery rhyme. "Run, run, run," he said lightly. "He likes when you run." "Walk," Jon said. His hands flexed in the rope. "Walk, Rickon." The boy walked. The pace was what you choose when someone has said not to run and you want to run so badly your spine wants to jump out of your meat. He put one foot down and then the next, and each step had weight in it because each step had choice. He got half the distance and men inhaled everywhere like a wave. He got 3/4. Harold Karstark's mouth twitched. Not even he could keep it still. Smalljon's hands went into fists and out again. Sansa's breath came once, shuddering, and Ghost went very still as if he had become a statue of winter and not a beast at all. Ramsay smiled and tilted his head like a man thinking what his next sensati might be. He raised a hand, lazy, and that hand made Jon understand in a single killing heartbeat what this had all been about. Smalljon's head whipped. "We swore," he said, abrupt and fierce, and that made men near him lift their heads as if a new wind had arrived. Ramsay let his hand hang there in the air for a long moment. He had wanted to make a shape with it. He had wanted to feel the power of the shape. Then his gaze came past the weirwood face and hit something in the eyes there. And Jon did not know if it was gods or men he read in whatever cracked through Ramsay's little performance. Ramsay's hand dropped. His mouth made a small disappointed child's moo. "If you like," he said to Small Jon. "We are favored by fortune in so many ways, and this is small change." Rickon reached Jon and did not run after all those steps where he had not run. He came the last yard in a kind of stumbling solemnity and dropped his forehead to Jon's shoulder with a small shudder that might have been a cry if Stark boys cried where men watched. Jon turned his face into Rickon's hair and breathed his name as if the syllables were snow melted on the tongue. One of the guards made a motion toward the boy as if to take him back. The Small Jon caught the man's wrist without looking and squeezed until the bones chimed, and the man made a face like bad milk, and no more motion was made. Davos leaned, cut the rope where it knotted under Jon's wrists, and let the pieces stay as proof. The small things that were not nothing mattered. He stood, put a hand on the back of Rickon's head as he had done in a dozen harbors for boys who were not his, and spread his fingers as if to feel the shape of the skull under the hair and memorize it. Ramsay clapped his hands lightly, as if a mummer had done well. "Now we dine," he said, "for his men, for the walls, for the crows and the clouds and the old gods who listened more than men should. You go inside with me, Snow. You have a warm room. I have a cup you'll like. You can watch the snow fall through my window and think about your new accommodations. I have a chain ready for you. I had it made once when I needed to keep a dog from pulling at its collar and escaping. You'll find it bites less than the rope. Keep your chain," Jon said. "You have what you wanted." "Some," Ramsay said. "For now." He turned on his heel and walked out as if he were balancing something on his head, and this was a game to show children how to move without spilling. The Umber and Karstark followed. Jon rose, feeling the rope's ghost on his wrists. His knees were wet. His flesh had grown numb there, and the numbness had a sullen ache under it. He followed. He did not look back at Sansa because he would see the thing in her eyes that would make him stop walking and kill, and then the old gods would have to judge what the point of the oath had been. Inside, Winterfell was exactly as he remembered and nothing at all like he remembered. Halls wore new shadows and new smells. There was a cold stripe down the middle of the great hall that had not been there when father had held court. Perhaps they had pulled up old rushes and laid new badly. Perhaps something darker moved through the place like a man with a knife. Servants watched him, some from under their lids, some plain-faced. He saw a girl with hair to her waist, light brown, who did not drop her eyes quickly enough and let him see pity there and the hard point behind it that might one day be courage. Ramsay made a gesture like a flourish. Two men who had been waiting took Jon by the arms without roughness because roughness would have played too showily in front of other men. They took him to a small room with a narrow window and a stink of old bedding. A chain lay coiled on the hearthstone like a snake. Jon stood before it and did not move. The men shifted. Ramsay leaned in the door. "I said I had a chain," he said. "I did not say I would not use it. Kneel to it? Or would you like to be made to?" "Do whatever theater you require," Jon said. There was no contempt in his voice, and that made it worse. "We are both tired of performance. But if you fail in the one thing you have just done cleanly, the men you pretend to own will lose faith in the shape of you. Then you'll only have fear. Fear cracks in winter." Ramsay's smile had come back. It was a thing with too many teeth. "I ought to cut your throat now because you do not bore me enough to live," he said lightly. "But you are not finished being useful." Jon let them chain him. He held his wrists out and watched the iron rings close. He counted his breaths, put them in a row and tied them like fishermen tie floats to a net to keep it from sinking all at once. He thought of Ghost. He thought of Sansa walking away with Rickon's hand in hers, the set of her shoulders, the way she would not look back because wolves do not look back at foxes when they are carrying meat that matters. He thought of men as ice or fire or stone. He thought of Davos as wood, burned and scarred and yet well-sounding. He thought of Tormund as the crack in the dam. Outside, the snow thickened. Sansa walked with Rickon between Davos and Tormund and kept her face forward. She did not let herself quicken. She had learned what men watch and how to move when men watch. Her hands had held prettier things once. They held her brother now, a better weight than any jewel. When they were far enough that the walls were a memory, she stopped with deliberation and sank to one knee in the snow so she could put her hands on both sides of Rickon's face. "Listen to me," she said. Her voice did not tremble because if it trembled he would see fear and fear would breed fear in him and fear in him would make him run and running would bring arrows. "You will not pick up a sword unless someone tells you and the blade is laid proper in your hand. You will not speak unless asked and then you will speak whatever thing is your first thought back. As I will not have a liar for a brother. You will not look back at those walls. Do you understand me?" Rickon made the smallest nod. Sansa bent and pressed her forehead to his. It was a gesture she remembered Mother making when Sansa had been small and furious with Arya for stealing her ribbon, and the world had felt like an injustice that would never right itself. "Good. Now we walk." He walked. Tormund matched his short strides with men's patience. Davos looked behind him once with an old sailor's habit of measuring how far he'd come and what the wind did to him. The camp, when they made it back, was a sudden island of heat and noise and cold laughter. The men who saw them come shouted once, a sound that started in their bellies and rolled out. It did not sound like the sound men make when they think they have one. It sounded like something different, an agreement with themselves that they could win. Sansa put Rickon in a tent with 4 guards she would have trusted with her own throat if she had not needed to keep it for saying certain words later. She stood outside the flap with Ghost like a white shadow at her thigh. The camp breathed again. Davos left the tent and walked as if casual to the place where the tree line wagged its black tail close to the road. He had not meant to go to the ashes, not now. Not with the boy saved and the man caged and the next things rattling in a bag ready to spill. Yet his feet took him the way feet will, to the place where the snow had a faint black underlay, and where the land had the look of a place given over to something it did not much want but had accepted because that was what lands did. He crouched in the crusted snow. His fingers, half numb, slid under a drift. They came up with a blackened stag carved from a piece of wood and burned on one side. His hand trembled. He had seen enough burned flesh to know the smell memory made when it rose. It rose now, thin, like a child's voice from under a door. He closed his hand. He stood a long time, the little thing in his palm. The sound around him became a bagpipe's drone, distant, endless. Eventually he walked back. He did not go to John. John was not there to go to. He went to a red tent where a woman sat with red in her hair and red in her dress and the wrong sort of red in her eyes, and he set the stag down in front of Melisandre of Asshai without a word. She looked at it and did not touch it, because even she knew there were times when touching things burned worse than leaving them alone. Later, Davos said, and his voice had a bottom it had not had since he had been a boy stealing loaves to keep his brothers fed. Later, you'll answer for this in whatever court a wolf's hall makes. For now, we have a boy to keep breathed and a man to take back. He left the tent. He had never been a hard man when he could help it. The new hardness in him sat awkwardly, as if he wore someone else's coat. But it would serve. Night fell fat and fast. Sansa had the camp put to half-sleep and double watch. The plan that had been a clumsy thing with too many elbows sharpened itself on necessity. They would not attack the walls at dawn as they had meant to. They would not set their lines and pray for a shield wall to hold against cavalry that would drive them down if driven properly. They would not play Ramsay's game on Ramsay's board with Ramsay's pieces. They would keep the boy in the belly of the camp and put the dire wolf at his door and take the hours the cold gave to make men think about their beds and their wives and their hearths. They would make the clay they had lengthen and lengthen until it could be thrown farther. Posterns? Sansa asked Tormund and Davos. There are wells. There are always wells. There's a well near the west wall and a drain that leads out toward the old ash yard. There is a door that is hard to see from the walls that opens into the cellars, near the old mice holes where we would hide when Septa Mordane had an eye open. You walked those holes too, Tormund said with abrupt affection. Good, good, a little lady who knows where food is kept. We'll need that in winter. Sansa almost smiled. I know more than kitchens, she said. I know where men will be when they think their lord wants them seen. He'll have them on the battlements for show as long as we keep our fires going and our lines loose. He'll keep fewer at the posterns because he trusts the cold. He trusts that men do not like to wriggle on their bellies in snow. He trusts that women won't lead men where their shoulders barely fit. She looked at Davos. He trusts the Umbers. Davos arched one brow. Is there a reason he shouldn't? From where I'm standing, they will waver, Sansa said. Not all. Not the Karstarks. Harold has made a second house for himself out of his father's ghosts. But the Umbers have old friends who would not watch them spit in a heart tree and call the spittle honor. They will stand until they watch him break a thing they think no man ought to break. Then they will move. The certainty in her voice was not hope, and not cynicism. It was the sort of certainty that made men in old times draw lots and go into caves because someone had told them where treasure lay and how to avoid the crack in the floor where snakes nested. We will give them that break. He will be impatient. He has Jon in a chain. He will think he can pull us like a goat. Let him think it, Tormund said, and his teeth flashed like a white line painted quickly. I'll wriggle for you if you ask it, Lady Stark. I've wriggled into worse holes for less meat. I'm sure, Sansa said, and the nearly smile was there again. A small kindness to the huge man. They sent men with the night. Not many. Men who could put their bellies into the snow and not think their pride broken by it. Men who could keep quiet even when their bones wanted to knock together. Men who would not think about glory when the dark pressed. The camp breathed. Ghost lay at Rickon's feet. The boy's hand was in the fur so deep he could feel skin and heat and heartbeat. Inside Winterfell, Jon did not sleep because the iron at his wrists and ankles would not let him sleep. The walls were old. Men had carved their names in them. Some of the names had been done with knives and some with nails when knives were not given to the men whose fingers had wanted them. He counted the letters and made them into patterns and did not think about hunger. They fed him like a dog. He took the food because he would not hand Ramsay little victories, and because a man who thinks better fights better, and because if he were lucky he would need the strength. Ramsay came at midnight with a trencher and a cup and a cloth over his shoulder, as if he meant to play servant and lord both. He set the cup where Jon could see it, careful to lay the cloth once over the rim as if to shield it from dust. "Wine," he said. "I do not drug my guests. It is so crass. I find them more interesting when they squirm with their whole minds." John looked at the wine and back up at the man's face. "You should have drugged me," he said. "It is a miscalculation. Many small miscalculations make winter into the thing that kills you." Ramsay laughed. It wasn't a bad laugh. That was almost worse. It sounded human, the way a fox's bark sounds like a broken child's laugh. "You think I do not have men with eyes?" he asked. "I know your dogs slither under my walls. Let them find gnawed stone and old bones. There are mines under this keep that a child cannot fit through. The only exit your clever little men will find is the one we open and close for them." He leaned in. "Did you enjoy your brother? It must be getting old. Taking what belongs to me." "Everything you think belongs to you is borrowed," John said. "You have never owned anything. Men who cannot keep oaths cannot keep things. People are not things." Ramsay sat down because men of his sort always sat when they wanted to press a point, and kept their guests standing, locked, constrained, to make the sitting feel like superiority. He put his elbows on his knees and laced his fingers and rocked a little as if he were in a childhood chair by a hearth. "Tell me about the wall," he said. "Was it good? Did it taste like men? Did you stand on it and look north and think, 'Ah, here at last is a thing as cold and as without mercy as I am'?" John didn't answer. Somewhere a dog barked and another answered, and overheard it all a wolf made a low sound that no human throat could make. Ramsay's eyes flicked to the window. He looked annoyed that a dog had spoken when he had wanted silence. "You know," he said conversationally, "I did not mean to be this. I meant to be lesser. It is my nature to be less. The world made me more. Your father made me less by existing. Now I make myself more by unexisting him. If you had left your oath and stayed away, I would have had less to do. But here you are making me more. It is a kindness, really. You were always exactly this," John said. Ramsay rose. "Would you like to see your lines tomorrow?" he asked lightly. "I'll have you walk to the wall. You can watch your little dear troops make pretty. If I am feeling generous, I will elsewise give them an hour before I let my dogs hunt. I will make sure your sister is close enough to be splattered when I cut your throat, if you like. She looks better in red." He looked at the chain, then at John's hands where the skin above the iron had rubbed raw and the blood had dried dark. "You won't whimper," he said. "That's a shame. I like the little sounds best." He went away. The room breathed its old stink and the new iron smell. John counted the names again. Near dawn, the south sky pulsed. It was the pulse of torches and the slow rhythm of men waking in ranks. Ramsay would have them out on the wall to be seen. He would have the great banners with the flayed men hung down where the wind could make them look like they were writhing. John held this in his head to keep it from being too new when he would see it next. He closed his eyes to think of the other thing he would see, the thing he chose to let himself see only twice so that it would not hollow him with longing. He saw Sansa's face turn to him across snow, set not in love or fear but in resolve. He saw Rickon's hand on Ghost and Ghost's head angled to the boy, watchful, acknowledging him. He saw the way one would stand when the time came, a mountain told to move who knew that he would move for no man and yet would move for certain reasons that had nothing to do with men at all. The plan that Sansa and Davos and Tormund made in the off-hours between breaths and decisions was a thing of parts. Men would slip when moon and cloud allowed. A small pack of wildlings with blades that didn't catch starlight would take the west wall drain and wriggle on their bellies like snakes toward the postern door. They would have to have someone inside to unlatch it. For that, they needed a kitchen boy who had no taste for dogs. They had such a boy, a scullion with hair like dirt who had one day watched Ramsay cut a goose and had not been able to eat meat since. His name was Hal. He would listen for the whistle like a robin's that Tormund would make with his big fingers in his mouth, and he would creep and he would lift and he would unlatch. Tormund told him that if he did not lift and unlatch, he would have to marry Tormund's ugliest daughter, and the boy had turned pale and said he would lift and unlatch. Tormund had laughed and slapped his back and Hal had not fallen over, which told Sansa something about boys and about Tormund both. They had other parts. Davos sent a message with a boy to the Umber lines. A boy who had once served a trencherman lured his pie and had learned just how much meat you could hide in a crust before it broke. The message was nothing but a piece of hard bread with an Umber sigil burned into it and a wolf's head, carved clumsy and true. If it found the right hand, it would say the thing messages sometimes said without words. We see what you do and we are watching. The Umbers liked to be watched when they did a thing and liked to be unobserved when they did the other thing. If they were to do anything, they would need an excuse, and that small burned bread might be excuse enough. Sansa wrote a shorter letter than Jon had, because the thing she meant to say worked best in few words. Peter, she wrote, you will come now. You will not come later. You will not stand in a grove to watch who bleeds and then decide. The Vale owes my mother's bones. The knights of the Vale will ride, and they will not ride late. If they ride late, I will tell their lord the names of the men who sold his father and the way you like to be kissed. She didn't sign it. She sealed it with wax pressed with one of the carved buttons from her sleeve because the Ramsay letter had taught her that seals mattered only in the minds of men who already wanted to be convinced. She sent that letter south with a hawk Davos's friend had stolen 3 years ago and taught tricks to. She did not know if the hawk would find its way through the gray, but she sent it. They waited. In the waiting, men wasted jokes and made plans and sharpened blades that would bend anyway the first time they hit bone that was angled wrong. Sansa sat with Rickon and told him about a summer that had been before he was old enough to remember, about a pie Mary Manderley had baked shaped like a ship, about Arya turning up as a beggar with mud on her nose as a part of some game and Septa Mordain pretending not to see as a part of her own. Rickon stared at her face with the intensity of a boy who is trying to turn someone's words into pictures he can keep in his pocket. Bran? He asked once, small as snow falling. Sansa was a soldier and a lady both. She said what she had to say. He rode north, she said. He rode farther than the world. He will come back if there is a way back. Rickon looked at her and at Ghost, and the old Stark thing in him made him nod as if he were already a man making a decision. Dusk. The field in front of Winterfell froze into gray. Ramsay dressed his walls. Men came and made noise. Torches burned. The flayed men on the banners made their old, quiet moving. It was not so different from the above of a butcher's shop in a good quarter of a great city, where you could hear the gentle dripping and the flies in summer. Jon walked to the wall under guard. He thought the air changed when he walked under the gate, that the stones made their own wind. He was surprised to find his breath did not quicken. He looked out at the field and saw the torches of his own camp, and for a breath he saw in the space between those lights the outline of a man as big as a battered tower, waiting for the moment when bigness mattered more than archers. Ramsay came to stand near him, but not too near. He made a show of ignoring the chain at Jon's ankle and of not minding the guard who stood at Jon's shoulder, as if all this were a game played by cousins in a hall during a storm. "Look," he said, and he had the satisfaction of a host showing a guest a fine view. "Does it make you want to hold your breath? All those little lights, those will all go out. It will be quieter then." He tilted his head. "Is it your sister who makes your lines? She arranges them like a woman arranges cloth. Pull here and it gathers, pull there and it falls. She is not clumsy. I liked that about her. She would have learned." Jon did not answer. The torches in their picket broke, parted, reformed. It was movement to make men on the wall feel good about themselves. It was distraction. Ramsay's eyes tracked it as a cat's eyes track a string. Behind the play, behind the obviousness of it, in the fold of a shadow near the west wall, something else moved. In that fold, Hal the Scullion breathed like a rabbit and wished he had never seen a goose. Tormund's whistle came, a marvel coming out of a mouth that big and made for bellowing. Hal slipped a bar with fingers that had the memory of washing stubborn cups. He lifted. Cold iron resisted like an old grudge and then shrugged and gave. The postern opened a hand's width, then two, then enough for two men to slide one over the other like fish. Wildlings slid, then more, then Tormund himself, which made the door breathe differently for a second because of the size of him. Hal pressed himself into the wall and became a thing of mortared flint for the moment because he would rather be stone than meat. Ramsay leaned nearer to Jon, eyes narrowed. "How close do you think my dogs are to your beefy friend?" he asked merrily. "Will he get a hand past the kitchen? Do you think your clever little halfling will lift a latch? Will the men with him stink of the wrong snow? You are not good at this game, Snow. You bring the wrong pieces. You stick your queen out and think your pawns won't be chewed." John didn't answer. He watched the fold of shadow become less a fold and more a gathering. Bells would ring soon. He could feel the moment pulling toward the place where it would break. He could hear one thinking in the dark, as if the earth itself made a sound when a thing that large made up its mind. The first alarm bell went, a mouthy, ugly ring that had not been tuned properly by men who did not remember what such bells had been made for. Ramsay went still, as if he loved noise that came at his bidding but resented noise that did not. He turned his head sharply to the left. He opened his mouth to shout a thing that was meant to make men align. Out beyond the walls, torches suddenly peeled away from one line and made another that pointed like a spear at nothing anyone could see from the wall. The men on the wall moved like a flock seeing hawks. In the moment between one clumsy order and the next, the west postern door opened like a mouth and did not close in time. Blade met throat in a small, quiet dark. A man tried to cry out and made only a small statement of surprise that ended in a wet gargle. Harold Karstark was fast. He was down the steps and into the cold corridor that led to the postern with a speed that would have done a younger man proud. He had trained his body for years to stillness. When it moved like something unsheathed. Tormund stepped into the light of the torch and grinned at him, and that grin was a fist in the stomach. Harold raised his sword and brought it down and down again, and would have made a meat of the big man if the big man had not also been a man who had lived long by not dying easily. They went at each other. The corridor rang. Karstark's men came and died. Not many, but enough to be a story for another winter. Hal pressed his back harder to stone and thought, "This is what meat looks like when it's being made." On the wall, Ramsay said very softly, "Interesting," and made the decision to close the gate rather than surge men into the west corridor in a rush, because closing the gate was a story anyone could clap to, and they would not question the point of it. John saw him move his hand and saw the plan tighten around that hand like a noose. Davos said once that if you watched a man's hands, you could see his thoughts. Ramsay's hand made a little graceful cut outlining how the gate would come down. John put his chain on the stone step and counted heartbeats because he could not stop counting things. The gate did not come down fast enough. If Winterfell had been tended by men who remembered what it was to defend and not to strut, the gate would have fallen in an eye's blink. It shuddered, groaned like a drunk waking, and came down half, a huge oaken tongue stuttering in its groove. One was already moving by then. John felt, rather than saw, the time when the large man turned into a force. He hit the gate like weather. Wood screamed. Iron bolts popped like seeds in a fire. Men who ran to find something to do found themselves running in a direction that had no end. The gate did a thing it had not done in centuries. It gave. It splintered. Ramsay's face changed. In that change was a thing that would be whispered later by men in inns who had not been there. The look in a cruel man's eyes when the stone he trusted to be stone turned into meat. He turned, snapped an order that was mostly sound and little meaning, and ran. The wildlings came through the broken gate with a sound that had more joy in it than it should have had in war. Their joy was ugly and beautiful both. The way a man's laugh is ugly when he laughs at a funeral and lovely when he laughs because he has been let go from something heavy. Men on both sides made noises they would not remember making, because the body remembers more than the mind and then forgives in order to live. John did not wait to be unchained. The man guarding him had gone to the wall edge. John stepped to that man, caught the back of his neck between his bound hands, and put his head into the man's face. A blow that cracked cartilage, ruined the man's balance, and took him to his knees. John followed and put the man's face into the crenel with an efficiency that came from years of training when not much else had been consistent. He took the knife from the man's belt, cut the chain link, cut the man's throat because there was no time for half measures, and did it cleaner than he wanted to and less clean than he would have on a morning after a good sleep. He turned. The walls were a story from childhood with different words now. He ran down the steps. A boy he had once shown how to fit fingers around a bow darted past him with a spear and ran at a man with a painted helm. And John took the spear from him as he went because the spear fit his hand better than the boy's, and because he would not watch a child take a man's blow if he could put himself there instead. He forgot he had no sword to begin with and remembered it when the spear shaft splintered on a raised shield. He looked around, found his chain had brought him into the path of things that were beyond deciding, and found himself face to face with Small John Umber. They looked at each other. It was a moment outside the story, and John realized with sudden, knife-clean clarity that the great John had taught his son to smile like that when blood was up. There was a proposition in Small John's eyes. He had not decided. He needed one more thing to push him into a story that would let him live with himself in the winter to come. Ramsay chose that moment to ride into the yard with his men. He had not meant to. He had meant to cut off the breach with a clever little pincer and then emerge later as if nothing had happened. But the gate's cry had made him do a thing he had not planned. He spurred a horse and came like an omen into the noise. He put an arrow into a wildling who'd had his head up roaring. He put another into the back of one of his own men by mistake. No one but John and Small John saw it, and then he raised his bow and aimed at a clear, clean back. Once. Small John moved. He did not shout. He put his bulk in front of Ramsay's bow and caught the man's eyes with a look that said something a weirwood had said earlier. We swore. Ramsay's face made a small child's expression again, and he lowered his bow by half out of shock. One tore down the rest of the gate and then stood there like a mountain that had crossed a valley. Arrows came out of him. He took them and kept taking them. He roared seldom because he was a giant and not a storybook, but when he did the walls trembled. John turned back to Small John. This is the part where you remember who you are, he said low, so only the man could hear him. It was not said like a threat. It was said like a blessing offered. Small John's mouth twisted. He made an old, savage sound and turned his back on Ramsay. He put his shoulder into the fight and cut down a Karstark man who had been his friend since boyhood. He did not hesitate. It broke something in him, and in the breaking he found his line. Men saw him and understood without needing a prelate to explain. The Umbers began to waver and then to bend and then to suddenly be bending in a different direction than anyone had counted. You could feel that tipping like a lot of small metal nails pulled toward a bigger magnet. The yard had become a place of tight movements and instinct. John found Longclaw in a dead man's hand the way a man finds a ring in a pile of ashes when the light hits just right. He caught its hilt and felt the relief of a thing that had known his hand and still remembered him. He took a breath he had saved. He made himself not look for Ramsay because he knew the trick of making yourself look for the one thing that will get you killed. He made himself find the next thing that needed killing. He killed it. Sansa did not stay in the tent. She sent Rickon with Ghost and 2 guards to a place where the snow would take sound and break it into pieces too little to reassemble. Then she walked out into the press just far enough to be seen by men who needed to see a stark face that was not a man's. She watched without swallowing. She did not swoon. Men who glanced at her thought of Winterfell, not because she was a flag, but because she was a woman with bare hands in snow and a face that did not flinch, and it reminded them of their mothers, of a girl they had loved, of a goddess they did not believe in but would like to. She did nothing, and that nothing was a greater act of war than many men's mortal leaps. On the far ridge, the snow made a new sound. It was the sound of many hooves moving at a measured pace, not a gallop, not the panicked scrabble of war horses left to themselves. The Knights of the Vale topped the horizon in a long bright ribbon that made the men on the walls, the remaining ones, gape like minstrels. The world went quiet for a half-breath. Then it made a sound like wheat in a wind just before the storm hits. Peter Baelish rode at the fore with Lord Yon Royce as if one had the right by cunning and the other by iron habit. They came down not like saviors, it would have made Sansa sick if they had, but like men who had decided to be on the winning side at last and would pretend they had always meant it. Ramsay saw them, and there it was finally, fear. It lit his face worse than joy. The Vale did not charge in a mess like men in songs who want glory on their teeth. They came in order and ended in disorder because that is what battle does to neat things. They took the Bolton men between gate and field. The yard went hot with noise. One took 3 more arrows and another through his cheek and fell to one knee, and the stone went thump, and the thump went through men like a god putting a hand on a child to still it. He reached up and took the next arrow out of his face and snapped it with a motion like a man breaking a switch. He saw John for the first time in the thick of it. Something like a crinkled smile made cracks in his blood. He reached down and plucked a man who had his blade up behind John and destroyed him with the same careless motion as if the man had been a gnat. "Thank you," John said. Pointless politeness in a place where niceness had no purchase. One blinked as if he had felt a fly land on a paw. Ramsay ran. He did not run for the gate. It was a ruin with not enough gate left in it to hold anything. He ran for the kennels because a man goes to his gods when he is afraid, and those were his. John saw him go and followed the way a man follows an escaped goat into the brush. Annoyed, fatigued, purposeful. Sansa saw him go and did not move. It was not her work to chase. It would be her work later to finish. The kennels smelled of wet fur and old shit and fear. Ramsay had a bow. He did not tremble with it. He put an arrow into John's shield so hard the wood cried. John had no shield. He raised Longclaw and moved when he had to and stopped when he had to and made himself smaller or bigger as the doorways asked. It was a dance men did in small spaces with big consequences. Ramsay grinned and sent another arrow. It shaved John's cheek with a cold kiss and made the world go thin for half a beat. John set his feet. He watched the eyes. He saw the moment a cruel man decides to make a flourish rather than a killing thrust. In that fraction, he closed, took the bow as it came up with one hand and got his other hand on Ramsay's cloak and pulled him off his feet with a bad, messy yank. They went down together. Ramsay tried to get the knife from his boot. John's knee found it and made it stay. He hit Ramsay once with the hilt of Longclaw and saw the man's eyes fog and clear. The dogs whined in the back because the noise of men falling had made them think of meat. John did not beat Ramsay to death. It was in him to do it. The part of him that had ached in a smaller tent while Sansa had told her story of a wedding had ached to do it. He stopped. He got up. He looked down. Ramsay spat blood and laughed. For laughter is a thing men with too little imagination do when they cannot find a way to make a more complicated noise. John turned away and went to the door. He looked out at the yard where the battle had broken into small, separate fights as battles do when they are nearly ended. He saw Sansa crossing with 3 men at her back and none before her. He stepped aside in the kennel door. "He's yours," he said when she reached him. She stood under the low lintel and the dogs put their noses against the slats of their doors and drank in her smell like a story that had been retold in a dozen versions and now could end. Ramsay looked up at her. For the first time since she had known him, he looked like a boy who had done wrong and could not think of the next thing to do to make himself feel clever again. He made his mouth try to smile. "My lady," he said, "you are brave to come here. These are my ox. They are hungry," Sansa said. "I wonder whose meat they prefer." "You will not," John began, because Ned Stark lived in him enough to make him say the words. "Don't tell me what I will not do," Sansa said without looking at him. She took a breath. "I was taught once that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword," she said. "I believe that, but this is not a sentence. This is an ending." She looked at Ramsay with a light in her eyes that was not joy and not relief and not the red rage that burns and leaves a man empty. It was something colder and older and more practical. "You are not a lord. You were a wound. Wounds must be cleaned so the body does not rot." She gestured lightly. Men moved. They stripped Ramsay of his littler ornaments, the things that made a man feel like more. He squirmed. He laughed. He said some clever thing he had spent years building for this day. Sansa did not listen to the words. She had listened enough to men's words. They chained him in the kennel he had once chained a small thing in, a capriccio of justice that tasted bitter on the tongue and yet went down like a necessary medicine. John turned away and Sansa did not. She did not need to see it. She needed to be the woman who had made the choice. She stood until the cries stopped. She stood until the dog's breath slowed. She stood a moment longer so that the picture in her head would fix with a surety that would keep her from dreaming of it later in the wrong way. Then she turned as if leaving a room at a feast and went out into the clean cold. Outside, the men did the work that comes after the work. They loosened fingers. They tightened straps that were loose. They sorted the dead with the quick tenderness that men learn when they have to move bodies that might have a name. The Umbers and the Karstarks put down their swords. The first because they had remembered, the second because there was nothing left to hold a sword up for. The veil swept the yard once more and then settled like snow that had been thrown and wished to feel the earth. Jon found Sansa near the heart tree. Her hands were bare now. She had taken off her gloves at some point and forgotten to put them back on. Her fingers were red at the tips, not from blood but from cold. He took her hands and warmed them in his. Neither of them spoke. After a bit, she looked at his face as if to check if it was really there. He half smiled and then stopped because smiling felt wrong in this place. They breathed. It was enough. They took the long night and made it into a day again. Smoke rose. The wounded were arrayed on straw and covered in whatever layered cloth could be found. There were men whose wives would find themselves widows in new winter. There were boys who would not become men and men who had been boys and never learned how to be anything else and who were dead now and would not have to. One lay in the yard in a shape that made the yard look too small, and the men who had arrows left in their quivers pulled them from his body with a carefulness that made Jon's throat tighten. They covered the giant with a sailcloth, and some man who had not been born north of the trident whispered words in some god's language that may as well have been anybody's. It was right. Jon put his hand on the sailcloth and felt the great form under it and did not speak either because sometimes silence names better than words. Later they gathered in the great hall because halls matter and men will gather in them even when the roof is cracked and smoke won't lift properly and the table is the wrong table. The banners that had mocked men with pink and flayed shapes were down. They had not been torn. Sansa had them folded and set aside because men in the north remembered things, and it would do to remember those. The old direwolf hung again, and if it was the wrong shade because the cloth was new, the people in the hall ignored the wrongness and saw the right. Rickon sat in a chair too big for him with Ghost beside him. He had bathed reluctantly. He had eaten and pushed his food into a pattern that looked like a tower and then knocked it down with a small child's careful savagery. His eyes were very old and very young, and that made men who had daughters look away and then look back because they could not look. He held his hands clenched in the fur at Ghost's neck. The direwolf seemed to understand that he was a pillow and a pillar both. Rickon had never had much of a chance to learn words like duty. He seemed to have swallowed one whole anyway. Jon stood to one side like a soldier who does not know what to do with a haul. Sansa stood near the hearth with Davos a little to her left. Peter came with the veil and stood a little behind the others, as if he were a man who did not need warmth because his blood was clever. He had not spoken to Sansa yet. He watched her with a face that was meant to be unreadable. Lord Yohn Royce put a hand on his hilt and then took it off as if to remind himself he did not always need to be a sword. Men made noises that were meant to be formal words and sometimes were formal words. "The boy," said Manderly's cousin. A man with a drift of flour dusted permanently on his beard. "The boy is Lord of Winterfell by right. We have a boy. We have a Stark. The North remembers." He sounded as if the words had been waiting under his tongue and were glad to be out. His eyes went to Jon and flicked away and came back and settled there. "And we have the one who brought him back." There was a murmuring. Lyanna Mormont had come because there was no keeping her from a hall where men would be told what is what. She stood up now because men were taking too long to get to the point. She drew breath as if she were about to hunt. "This is how it is," she said. Her small voice carried like a whistle between mountains. "The boy is Lord because his blood says so and because we need it said. He will not sit in the cold chair with a sword across his knees. He is a child. He'll run if you let him, and not because he's weak but because boys run. We will not put that weight on him. The Lady Sansa is of the same blood and she has not run when there were good reasons. She can speak for him while he learns why chairs matter." She turned her head with her chin high to look at Jon, and in that movement there was both respect and stubborn will. "And him," she said, "the other Stark blood. He bled for us. He fought for us. He did the thing he should not have done because his heart is not made right by politeness alone. He is not king. We do not need a king. We need a man who will take the men we have and make them watch the wall with both eyes at once. He should do that. If he says no, I'll shame him." John blinked, and the oddest thing happened. Men in that hall smiled, not because there was a joke, but because someone had said a true thing. Sansa's mouth made a shape he remembered from girlhood, surprised and pleased to be surprised. Peter's eyes narrowed the smallest possible amount. "I will not be king," John said, finding his voice only after he had tried it quietly first and scared it with the echo. "I wore a crown once in a way." He had worn the black, and that had been enough for anything. "I will not sit. I do not sit well." Some men laughed. He did not smile. "I will take the men who will come and go to the wall. If there are men left at Eastwatch, I will be with them. If there are not, I will find some." "You leave now?" someone called, too quickly with panic in it. When we have," John said gentle and wished he had a better word for what the we was and the have. "Winter is here. The dead will surely be if they are not already. If we wait, we will be waiting with our throats bared. If we move, we may pick the ground where we meet. There are things coming that do not care for halls or banners. They do not care for the names of our houses. They care only that we breathe. We must meet them where breath freezes. I was given back my breath. I'll spend it well." He glanced at Sansa and saw pride there like heat under ice and something else, fear, or its more honest cousin, care. He wanted to put his hand on her arm and say all the things he had not known how to say when they had met again in the mud between memories. He wanted to tell her she had done something that made the world shift a hair. He wanted to say that sometimes the right thing felt wrong and sometimes not. He did not say any of it because there were men in the hall and men needed words like bread, and he had to give them bread first. "Lord Umber," Davos said. He had a way of putting invitations into the air that sounded like commands in a man's own voice. "The North will want to know where your oath hangs now." Small John had a strip of linen across his left forearm where a cut had been laid. He managed a crooked grin that looked like a broken wheel that might still spin if pushed. "With the Starks," he said, and there was weight in the "as it ought and as it should have stayed. I was a fool. Be ever the fools who are quick to say it." He did not glance at the Karstark. He did not need to. The hall did the glancing. "Let my men who remain fight where the snow says to fight. And let it be said in my hall that if I ever break at a heart tree again, the heart tree may take me." He said it as if he meant it. It was enough. Harold Karstark lifted his chin. "My father died for Robb Stark's stupidity," he said flat. Men rustled. "I stood with the man who fed us when we were hungry. That man is dead. I will stand with the next man who feeds us. If that is this hall, then I will stand until it starves us." Some men thought that practical. Others thought it cowardice dressed as practicality. It didn't matter. It mattered that he did not reach for a sword in a hall where white smoke hung in the rafters. "A boy is lord," Peter said finally, "because it is the way of some men to speak last and then call it summing." His voice was smooth as ever, and Sansa wondered if he had any roughness left in him for moments when the right roughness would matter. "A woman is regent. A man is made into something like king without calling him a king. The Vale rode to stand in the field where a thing had already been decided. The tale pleases Lady Sansa. I wonder if men will be as pleased when the snow deepens." "They will be pleased to be alive," Sansa said, "and awake, and with beds and bread. The Vale helped make this. The Vale will be welcome here, for a while." She did not say, "I know you. Do not think I do not know you." It would have been wasted in front of men. She would say it later where it mattered. The hall ended as halls do, in a murmur and a new set of errands. Men were sent to look at stores. Men were sent to count the dead. Men were sent to speak to ravens. Jon and Sansa were left at last in a corner near the old carved chair where Father had once set his hand and said things that had made the world seem simple when you were a child and lied. Rickon fell asleep on Ghost with his mouth open and a line of drool shining from the corner like a soldier's fine scar. It was both funny and heartbreaking. Sansa covered him with a blanket as if he were made of something more breakable than he was. Davos came then and put the burnt stag on the table between them and looked at John with a face that had turned into an instrument he did not quite know how to play. Later, he said, the way he had said earlier when he had put the stag in front of a red woman. Later is now. He told the story. Melisandre came when called. She stood with her red hair and her red dress and looked at the little toy and did not blink for a long time. Then she did, slow. The room felt colder with her in it because belief can chill a room more than wind can. I did what I saw in the fire, she said. I did evil for what I thought was good. It is a poor argum. Ent with itself. Davos did not shout. He took his words out one by one and set them down as if he were setting stones in a wall. When he had done that, John said, "You saved my life." He was her child. Both of those things sit together in my chest. I exile you. Ride south. Do not ride back. If you do, I will have you hanged in the God's wood as a murderess and a meal for the crows, and the crows will be poisoned but satisfied. Melisandre dipped her head once, like a woman acknowledging a bet. The dead are coming, she said. We know it, John said. We go to meet them. If your God is there, he can watch from the side. She left. Davos's shoulders unclenched a hair. Sansa put her hand on John's arm. The days that followed were a winter of their own. They buried their dead in the hard ground and in cairns when the ground was too hard. They pulled pink banners out of their lofts and put them away with care. They found food in places Sansa had known to look and in places she had not, because sometimes serendipity keeps the kitchens as well as gods do. The Umbers sent men to their halls to haul back smoked meat that had not been promised to the Boltons yet with oaths. The Karstarks sent what they had because they would rather have men eat it under another roof than let it freeze in cellars that would be opened by enemies. The Vale proved themselves useful as well as present. Men made roads wider and set planks over streams where the old bridges would not do for carts. Sansa learned, quickly, the names of the men who did the work of carrying messages and of making other men do what they did not want to do. She gave them tasks that would make them feel important because they were. Rickon memorized the hall 3 times and then got bored with memorizing it and memorized the yard, and then the ramparts, and then the distance from the weirwood to the great hall steps by counting his steps and muttering numbers under his breath. When men smiled at that, he glared at them until they stopped because he did not want to be smiled at for boyishness. Sansa found him once with a practiced sword in his hand, swinging it like a scythe would be swung. She set the sword down and taught him how to hold it. She did not know much. She knew enough to make him learn he did not know enough. That was a lesson men too rarely learned. John sorted men. He made companies out of men who had never stood together and watched how they shifted when given commands. He sent letters north, south, east, and west the way a man sets pigeons loose from under his cloak. Some would return, many would not, a few would die on the way, and one would come back with a hole in his wing and land anyway. He slept 5 hours and looked like a man who slept 4. Tormund lingered because he had decided not to leave the boy he had watched walk through snow. He had other reasons too, but he kept them as explanations he would tell later around a fire to men who needed tales to keep them from thinking of other things. The morning John rode away was brittle and bright. The kind of morning where sound carries farther than it has a right and men's breath comes out looking like words. Sansa stood in the yard with Rickon and Ghost and watched him put foot to stirrup and then stop because he had remembered something else he needed to say. He came back and put his forehead to hers the way she had done to Rickon, and for a moment they were children by accident in a place that had made them old. "Keep the boy breathed," he said, and it was half a plea. "Bring yourself back with breath," she said, and it was half a command. He looked to Rickon. "Don't be brave," he said. "Be good. Brave gets boys dead. Good keeps them as men." Rickon nodded solemnly as if the words had been a puzzle he'd solved in his head already. He reached up and put both hands on John's face and held it there like he might be able to keep the shape of it in his palms and carry it with him. John kissed his brow because if fathers did that, brothers could too, and they would take what rituals Ned would have given and make their own. He rode out with Davos on one side and Tormund on the other, and a small rustle of men behind like leaves blown down a road. The gate stood open. The broken pieces of the old gate had been set aside, not burned, because men would make benches of them later, and there was a kind of humor in that. He turned once at the edge of the yard and saw Sansa standing very straight with her hands at her sides and the boy pressed against Ghost. He lifted a hand. She did not. Some partings should be made without gestures, or they become play acting. He understood. He put his heels to his horse and went north to the newer winter. Inside Winterfell, Sansa went to her work. She did not think of herself as Lady of Winterfell because the word lady had been used on her too often as a blade and not a wreath. She thought of herself as Winter's steward and as her brothers. She met with Lord Royce and made him say what he had thought quietly about the North for years so she could measure the shape of it. She let Peter speak and listened, and when he said in the quiet of a postern, "You could be queen, you know. The men would choose you because men choose what their eyes love," she answered. "They would not choose me. They would choose an idea, and that idea would not keep them warm." He reached for her arm as if to coax the idea into flesh. She moved away and let him take air instead. He did not make a face. He did not have so many faces left that he could waste one. At night she sat sometimes under the heart tree and tried to remember the face carved in it from when she had been a girl and had thought the face was a storybook thing that grinned when the moon was high. It did not grin now. It watched. She whispered into its bark because the old gods were men who had been kind once and had died and lived on in wood, or else they were not men at all and could keep a secret be. Keep him, she said. It was the sort of prayer she would have mocked once. It was practical now. Keep him in your trees and your wind. Don't teach him any more of your jokes. He has enough. Keep him breathing. Word came from the north the way word always comes, with men weary and a horse with a limp and a raven with 3 feathers missing on one wing. John's letters were short and full of the sort of details that men who do not care about poetry put in because poetry is a luxury for summers. He spoke of castles made of ice and men made less than men and more than stories, and of a force that moves without hunger because hunger needs a stomach and these things had none. He spoke of fires that flared blue when the wind got in them and of a sword that had cut and then not cut and then cut. He spoke of men he had built into a wall and men who had broken like rotten wood. He spoke of women who had come with their carts and offered sausages and knives and a little warm for a price, and how all of it made him feel like the world was still the world even when it was not. Sansa kept the hall fed and the lines wide and the long talk longer. She met with Lyanna again and let the child speak. She watched Rickon grow 8 inches in 3 months as boys do sometimes and sob once. In private, when he could not find his favorite carved soldier because he had grown too fast to be gentle with it. She did not tell him not to cry. She held him and let his head be heavy on her shoulder until he hiccuped himself empty. One night, a blizzard came down from the moors with the sound of cloth ripping. Winterfell shuddered and settled. The fires in the hall burned high and men stamped and laughed and told the story of the broken gate again. Sansa sat by the hearth and listened because listening had taught her more than speaking had. Peter stood in a shadow and watched. Lord Royce snored. Lyanna Mormont taught 2 grown men how to play a board game and beat them both and looked satisfied in a way that made Sansa's mouth curve. When the wind died, the world was different again. It is always different after a storm. Men count what they have, and if they are lucky they find the thing they thought lost under a drift turned up near where they had left it. Sansa stood on the wall and looked north. What she saw was a white line and the black threads of trees and a sky so pale it looked as if it would crack if struck. What she knew was that beyond where sight stopped, a brother rode under that sky, and she would stand here and keep flame and order until he came back or did not. What she believed was that you could live on that for a long time. The last letter before spring, if you could call what broke then spring, came with a smear of something that might have been ash and a tear in the corner that made the top line curl like a girl's hair. It was John's hand, bruised into the paper rather than written. Sansa read, "We held. For now. The dead do not stop. Neither shall we." He had put a small thing in the letter, pressed between 2 scraps so it would not slip. It was an icicle of glass, thin as a finger bone, that melted when she touched it and left her finger wet and her palm tingling. She held her hand over the fire and watched the water dry and turned it into a proverb without putting words to it. Even the cold can be carried for a moment and then it becomes something else. She went into the yard where Rickon fought with a man twice his size with sticks and a childish ferocity that would have gotten him killed in any other place. She called his name, and he turned with sweat on his brow, and for a moment he did not look like Bran or like any other boy. He looked like himself. She held up her wet hand. "He says, 'For now,'" she said. "We say, 'For always.'" He grinned the old Rickon grin, sudden and wild. It broke her heart and healed it in the same breath. They kept the hearths. They kept the walls. They kept the names and the old stories, and they tried to make the right new ones when they could. Sometimes at night the wind pressed against the shutters, and Sansa would put her palm flat to the wood and feel the weight of the outside. She would think of a boy walking with a rope cut and remember how everyone's breath had stopped for a moment in the cold. She would let herself think of that longer than she could let herself think of other things, because it had an ending, and the ending had been a door opening. The North remembered. The North forgave slowly. The North learned to say the names of the dead and the living with equal care. Jon Snow rode the line where names made less difference than ice and fire. Sansa Stark held a hall and learned that justice is not a sword you swing once, but a weight you carry on your back across snow too deep for ponies. Rickon Stark grew and did not run because someone had told him not to. Winter was not done with them. Took more. He gave back less. Yet there was this. A bargain made under a white tree had been kept, and a boy had walked, not run, and a man had knelt, because sometimes kneeling is not surrender but strategy, and a woman had stood where dogs bayed and chosen the end of one man so that more would not find ends in his shadow. When the ravens spoke later of the dead finally cracking under spring's first, reluctant thaw and breaking apart like rotten ice where a river grows strong with melt, when they came with news that old friends had been seen walking out of woods where no one ought to, when the names whispered in the great hall at Winterfell multiplied until men had to choose which to carry and which to bury, when Jon Snow rode back with frost in his beard and a scar new and ugly across the cheek that had once been a boy's, when all of that came, the moment under the weirwood remained in all their minds as clear as if frost had written it on glass and never melted. Ghost brought his head under Sansa's hand as she stood on the wall waiting for the rider that W. As her brother made into a man by winter a second time over. She looked down. Below, the yard was alive. Above, the sky was the color of old bones. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere a pot boiled over and swore. Somewhere a man sang a rude song because men do. In the distance, a dark line moved against white. A flag lifted. A horse's legs threw up clods of old snow. They came like the continuation of a story rather than the end of one. She smiled then, a thing she did not allow herself often, because sometimes you spend smiles like coin and sometimes you hoard them until they buy something proper. This one bought her the feeling of a day that was not survived but lived. "Welcome home," she said to the air and to the stone and to the godswood and to her own blood, and to the boy who had walked and the man who had knelt, and to every winter that comes and goes and teaches a hall its lessons anew. It was not a prayer and it was not nothing. It was a promise that the bargain they had made with their own hardest parts would hold. The wind took it, and the snow kept it, and the house that had learned to breathe again in winter breathed it in and warmed it.